In this video, I'm going to show you how to add borders to your images in Squarespace. Now, there is a way to do this without code, and I'll show that to you, but I'm also going to show you how to do it with CSS code in case you want just a little bit more control over how those borders appear. Let's start with the code-free method. We're going to add a border to this image right here. So I'm going to click Edit, and I'm going to add a shape block to this section. And I'm going to adjust it so that it spans the entire width and height of the image that we want to add the border to. And then I'm going to double click on the shape to open up the block settings. You want to make sure that this is set to stretch, and it doesn't really matter what the color of the shape is because it's not going to show anyway, but I generally like to just set it to the same color as the border that I'm adding. So I'm going to set that to black. And then we're going to add a stroke. I'm going to make sure that the stroke color is correct here, and then we can adjust the thickness. There are a few presets here, so you can set it to small, medium, or large. The small preset is still 2 pixels wide, so if you want to add a very thin hairline border, you can adjust this down to 1 pixel, but I'm just going to leave it set to small so that I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to click out of that, click on the shape block again, and move it backwards so that it's sitting behind the image. And if I move my mouse, you can see that the border on that shape block is visible even though the shape is not, and it creates the illusion of having a border around the image. Now, one thing that's very important to note is that this only works if the image itself is set to fill. So if the image is set to fit, this is not going to look right. So make sure that the image is set to fill. Now, what if the image has a corner radius? That's when the corners of the image are slightly curved. I'm going to set a corner radius here of 20 so that you can see what that looks like, and you can see that it looks a little bit wonky with that border. And the easy way to fix this is to simply move the image back behind the shape block again, double click on the shape block, and set the corner radius for the shape to be the same as the corner radius for the image. And then I'm simply going to move the shape block back behind the image again, and you can see that it looks perfect now. Now, there are a couple of advantages of using this particular method to add borders to your images. One is that it is code-free, so it's very simple and easy. And the second advantage is that it gives you granular control over which images have borders because you're adding them one border at a time. The downside is that if you want to add borders to all of the images on your website, or even all of the images on a single page, it is going to be more time consuming. And that's where CSS code can come in handy. So to add a border to an image using CSS code, you want to go down to the bottom of the Pages panel, click on Custom Code, Custom CSS, and that's going to open up your CSS panel. Now, all of the CSS code that I'm using today can be found in the blog post that's linked in the video description. So you can simply copy and paste it directly into your Squarespace website, and it'll be really fast and easy. So the first thing we need to do is target image blocks. So I'm going to add .sqs block image, add my curly brackets, and then we're going to add a border. Now there are 3 values that we need to define here: the border width, the border style, and the border color. So I'm going to make this border 2 pixels, add a space. We're going to make this a solid border, add another space, and then we're going to set the color. You can use a hex code. I'm going to make this black, and I'm going to add my closing semicolon. And you can see that that accomplished exactly the same thing that we did using the shape block. Now, again, let's say that this image has a corner radius. So I'm going to set a corner radius of 20 pixels again, and I'm going to save that out. Go back into the CSS panel, and you can see now that there's a gap between that border and the image. So we're going to add a corner radius to the border itself. So I'm going to add border radius in the CSS code, and we're going to set this to be 20 pixels. Now you'll notice that there is a slight gap here between the image and the border at the corner. So I'm going to actually adjust this to about 22 pixels, and that should completely solve it. And you can see there that it did. You can always fiddle with these values a little bit if they don't look quite right. So you can see that this has added a border to every single image on this website. Now, what if you want to isolate images on a specific page or in a specific section, or even isolate an individual image if you'd rather use CSS instead of a shape block? To do that, we're going to use a Chrome extension called Squarespace ID Finder. I'll link that in the description below the video. So the Squarespace ID Finder makes it really easy to identify block, section, and collection IDs in Squarespace. So if we wanted to add this border to all of the images on this entire About page here, we would simply copy the collection ID. I'm going to add a line above the code that we already have. I'm going to paste in the collection ID, add an open curly bracket. I'm going to remove that closing curly bracket and add it back in at the bottom here. And that will isolate this to only this particular page. And you can do the exact same thing with a section. So I'm going to copy this section ID here, and I'm going to paste it in place of the collection ID. And you can see that this image now has a border. It looks like I'm going to need to save and refresh the page for this to load correctly. So you can see that this image has a border and none of the other images on this page do. Now, isolating a specific image is a little bit different. So I'm going to grab the block ID for this image here, and I'm going to paste it in place of this section ID. And you can see that that didn't really do anything. So what we need to do if we're targeting a specific image is remove the SQS block image code altogether and remove that extra curly bracket at the bottom. And that's going to add the border to this one image. I'm going to remove the border radius since this image doesn't have one. I'm going to save this out and refresh the page so that you can see that. And there we go. That's been removed from this image and it's only visible on this one. Now, another really cool thing about CSS code is that you can specify which sides of the image the border should appear on. So let's say that you only wanted to have a border at the bottom of this image. You would simply adjust this code. Instead of border, we're going to add border-bottom. And I'm going to save that out and refresh since Squarespace doesn't seem to be cooperating well today. And if I scroll down, you can see now that there is only a border at the bottom of that image. And the code to add this to the different sides is border bottom. You can do border top, border right, and border left. Now, something else that you can do is you can set a different border style for each side of the image. So let's say that you wanted the border at the top to be 2 pixels, solid, and red. You can see that we've now added a red border at the top and the border at the bottom is black. And we can do this on every single side if we want. It would look kind of ridiculous, but you can definitely play around with this if you want. So I'm going to add border solid green, and then I'm going to add a border left, 2 pixels solid blue. And you can see that you can really get creative with the different borders that you add here. You can even play around with the different border styles. So we've added a solid border to all the sides of this image, but you can add a dashed border, you can add a dotted border. There's lots of different things that you can do here. So that's how you add borders to images in Squarespace. I hope you found this useful. And if you were curious, I demonstrated this tutorial using my Mangrove Squarespace template, which you can purchase at launchoutloud.co.